Welcome back. Do you ever have one of those games where it feels like during the game that you're operating with surgical precision, punishing all the mistakes, and if not making the absolute best move, at least making solid, promising moves that develop and improve your position? I felt like that during this game for most of the time, all the way until the very end when I got a little on shaky ground. An interesting backstory to this game is that the opponent is a family member, younger family member, who I taught how to play chess back in the 1980s, late 1980s, early 1990s perhaps, when they were just a child and I was not quite an adult. And I was looking for a chess opponent and taught them how to play chess. And then obviously we grew up and went our separate ways, and this person challenged me on chess.com. So I accepted the challenge despite having a higher rating, just for fun. And I knew that was a mistake right away. You don't give a check with your bishop when a pawn can just attack and force you to move back, especially since that was a pawn I was going to move anyway. I felt like I had an advantage already because I'm more developed, gaining more space. Pretty sure knights on the rim are dim. I think there's a different rhyme for that, but basically you don't want your knights on the edge of the board if you can help it. But I wasn't sure how to punish that mistake, so I just went on with my development. By the way, you see the Stockfish evaluation here. I noticed that today, starting today, chess.com has Stockfish 15. Yesterday, it was Stockfish 14.1 in Chrome. Chrome is the browser I'm using here. In Firefox, it's still on Stockfish 12 or something. I have no idea why. But if you're using Chrome, or I think someone told me Microsoft Edge, you're getting Stockfish 15 as of today. So it takes a little longer to run the full depth, but it's supposedly a stronger engine. Anyway, back to the game. I wasn't sure if that was a mistake. I mean, obviously it's a well-guarded pawn, but I have easy, good places to move this bishop. It turns out it would have been much better for me to go to e5. And I haven't yet followed that line out to be sure why, because it looks like you could just punish it pretty quickly. I would assume with either this pawn to protect the rook, or the bishop out. Not sure why that would be such a bad deal. It says they would put their bishop there, and then I wouldn't take it. Oh, then I would take the pawn with the knight. Okay, I get that. And then if they took, I would get the rook. Makes sense. But I didn't see that during the game. I pulled back, which is fine. I like this bishop here. It's always, watching down through here. Also in the London, this is kind of my bad bishop. That's one reason for getting it out first in the London system, because you then develop all your pawns on the dark squares. So all these dark squares are guarded by your pawns, and you don't necessarily need the bishop. But anyway, I digress. That turns out to be a big mistake too. And again, it's because of the tactic. I'm supposed to put the bishop on e5. But that's fine. I continued my London development. And it wants me now to put either my bishop or my knight on e5. It's saying e5 is the way to go. Well, that's fine. I just decided to not let that get very far over there. I knew that wasn't great. I completed this dark squared pawn chain, which effectively locks out this bishop. That bishop's now staring at pawns and can't go anywhere. And also I'm preparing to shut this queen out over here. But anyway, en passant, you saw. I do know en passant. And that was a mistake because of this. I just picked up a free piece, so I'm a piece ahead on move 12. Also here, played one of my better moves, which was knight to e4. And not only was the idea to protect the bishop, but also aiming for this pawn, possibly trying to get in there if I need to. That turned out to not be a good move because of this. Yes, the queen can take, but now there's this pin. I just saw these tactics coming during this game, and sure enough, when the queen moved out of the way, I took the rook. So now I'm up a piece and an exchange, and felt pretty good about that. And look, there's a free pawn. So at this point, it's all just about being careful. I have learned over the years, especially this past year, when I know I'm ahead, just to be really careful. Not to look for flashy tactics and things like that, because I tend to mess those up. Now, someday I might be better at those. But right now, I learned to just be careful, take free pieces, or pawns in this case, with check, and always make sure that my pieces have places they can retreat to safely. Keep in mind things like development and castling, knowing what's under threat. So I was just being very careful. Not sure what that line was for. Oh, that line was during my previous evaluation. It showed me Stockfish wants me to put this knight here, and I guess that's because I can use my queen to get that pawn for free with check. But that doesn't make sense because that knight is there. So I'm not entirely sure why that's so great, but that's what it says the top move is. And it says if I did that, the king would just run away. Oh, and then I would come in here and aim for the rook, maybe? I don't know. That's what it said. But what I did was move back here, hoping for a discovered check in a moment. Wasn't quite sure exactly where I would put this knight, maybe here, or even back here to have a discovered check. Also, I was watching this possibility of the queen coming down here to capture this pawn, especially knowing that this bishop could move up at any time. So I was paying attention to that as well, and wanting to make sure that if I'm not directly guarding that pawn, that I am at least checking or attacking something. I feel like I've gotten a little better. The fact that I noticed that pawn at all, the fact that the queen was lined up with it. Yeah, and that arrow was because during my previous evaluation, it says Stockfish is saying I should just take this pawn now. And, of course, that would be a discovered check. But why wouldn't the king take the knight to get out of check? I'm not sure. It says they wouldn't. It said they would just block the check with the pawn. But I didn't. I did the discovered check back here. And the opponent blocked with the pawn. I castled. Again, I was seeing this. This pawn was under attack from the queen before I castled. Even though that wasn't my best move, I was trying to play careful, be safe. Also, this develops a piece that hasn't moved yet. My rook's been sitting back in this corner on h1 doing nothing. Now it can get into the game. And again, I know I have an advantage as long as I'm careful. I'm not too worried about this, although I did notice that this pawn was pinned. So I know that right now that's a free knight. So I guarded the knight by moving my queen here. Stockfish says their best move is just to take my queen, which tells you how bad off my opponent is if their best move is just to take my queen at this point. And instead they brought their rook to build a battery. I knew I wasn't in danger here. I knew that I have two pieces guarding my queen, and those pawns aren't pinned at all. However, I was still noticing that I wanted to be able to move stuff out of the way, and I didn't want this g-pawn to be pinned at any point. So I moved my king over, which wasn't the best move, and Stockfish is still saying they should just take my queen, but they didn't. So I took theirs. And knowing that I'm up on material, again, I'm up an astounding amount of material at this point. A full rook and some pawns. So I noticed that this tension has remained for some time. I was ready to take this pawn and march mine down, or just take theirs with the rook to break it open. They went to defend with the king, which wasn't the best idea, because see, previously their knight was also hitting this pawn, and so this brings a second defender. But I had been waiting for just that moment to trade here. That was also one reason I moved the rook first, because I knew that the bishop would end up pointing here. I'm now seeing some of these things a couple of moves ahead. So very nice. I did my plan. Nothing much that they can do as I start to march this wall of pawns down the board. that's just a giveaway of a pawn with tempo. They have to now move their rook. And I challenge the rook again while protecting the knight at the same time. That's another thing I'm getting better at. Dual purpose moves. Sometimes moves that have more than one purpose. Also, if you have noticed, all the pieces that I have placed on dark squares, all of them but these two so far. And that's intentional, because I knew back when they lost their dark squared bishop, when they gave it away, that this bishop can only see half the board. And it can't see most of my pieces. So again, intentional, getting better at that. They ran away with their rook. I start advancing my pawn. Now, Stockfish was a little behind. You saw that? It was having some trouble. Stockfish 15 maybe takes more processing power than I have. Regardless, there wasn't much my opponent could do as I began to consolidate my position. Again, I knew that was going to be a check, but I wanted this wall to be solid as well. And I was ready to move out. And here, yeah, that's probably what I should have done here. Is that what it says? Yeah, that's what that arrow was for from a previous evaluation. You can see the plus 55 and growing. I was being very careful here. I didn't want to just to give away that pawn, but now that I'm looking at it, it wouldn't have given away the pawn because my knight. Oh, and now Stockfish has found a mating sequence. It's true that my knight is guarding both of those, and my rook on d1 would have also hit that. So the king couldn't have gotten any closer to that pawn. That would have been fine. But I wanted to prevent the bishop from being able to come back this way, was my idea. I knew that was a mistake and wasn't sure exactly how to punish it. But I thought, if I were to be able to trap this king in here somehow, I would want this pawn to be defended. It says I can defend that pawn with this rook and then bring this rook over and end up with some sort of mating sequence in here. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work, but I just decided to bring my king to defend that pawn. And again, you will notice almost all my pieces are on dark squares, so this bishop is basically useless. The only exception right now are these two pawns. But anyway, I know that this king can't come any further through here. All these pieces are defended. And I know I'm about to get there. But I made the mistake of checking here when I should have been a little bit more patient. Because if you'll see, right here I have mate in 3. I can go to the rook to d1. And then they're going to have to bring their rook here, which I will just take. And then pretty much no matter what they do, I'll have checkmate right there. But I wasn't sure and I didn't see it. So I checked here, which takes us back to a mate in 9. That's okay. I'm not worried because I know I have the advantage. I'm just trying to be careful. I know that my knight is defending this rook, so I'm not worried about it. That rook is defending this pawn. And this rook is cutting off all of these squares. The knight's cutting off squares. This rook is now cutting off all of this. Their king can only go to one place, which it did. Oh, and I played the best move here too. I've learned about this tactic in the past year. Look at that. That was a nice fork, wasn't it? So I picked up the bishop. Now I have mate in 2. And this is the crucial moment of the game. I haven't yet decided on the title for this video, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be a clickbaity type title that's going to refer to this move right here. That the last move will blow your mind, or this one move something. Anyway, my opponent, knowing that they were done for, played here. And now I have mate in 2. I can check here with this rook, which is protected by this knight. The king then cannot move here because of the other rook. Has to go to one of 2 squares. And then that's mate or promotion to a rook or queen is checkmate. But instead I took the rook. And that's a stalemate, a draw. Right before I took the rook, I looked around and for some reason there was a blind spot and I didn't see this over here. And I thought, oh, okay, I can take the rook because the king can move here. I don't know why. I just didn't see that the king could not move at all. And yeah, so right there, I had all kind of great choices as long as I didn't take the rook. But I did take the rook and stalemated. So thank you for watching. Let this be a lesson to you. When you have the time, as I did in this game, check every piece on the board and make sure that king has a legal move. Because like I said, I did check, but not very long, and I thought, oh, sure, it can just move there, right? And then I took the rook. But check every piece on the board and see what it's guarding. Make sure all the squares around the king aren't cut off. The pawn's guarding that, and the knight's guarding that. Anyway, see you next time.